that like weight loss in itself is a very nebulous concept, right? Like it doesn't have any
Yeah.
specificity to it. So it can be overwhelming, and I think it's helpful to categorize things so that you have a little bit more control over the behaviors that you might be taking, right? Because that will help with weight loss. It's either incomplete in the way we think about them, or it's actually just not useful. So think about it from what you're putting in your body. You can break it down into quantity and quality, but you have some metric for how much quantity you're eating, and then the quality measure has something to do with like how hungry does the food make you. Like, so if you eat something, it might not have anything to do with the calories of how full you are afterwards. It'll have to do with the concentration of it, or just the pure like enjoyment of the food. So the reality is like the more you enjoy the food, the more likely you're to eat more of it. And just how your body responds to things like fat and salt and sugar, like you sort of get this delayed satiety or satiety from it, because before that it's like a drug. You're like, your body says, oh, I like this, give me more of it. Those are the two broad categories. So having some type of strategy for dealing with both, and that's always changing. It never needs to be one strategy, or it never needs to be all the strategies, let's put it that way. It could be like one strategy at a time, but you're just checking the boxes for that, because that quantity or that quality metric will always change. Like sometimes you're going to say, all right, I'm going to focus on maybe more like a high protein diet, focus more on high fat, low carb. You can't do it all when you think about quality, because there's no such thing. And I think in order for you to get the idea of how like one thing affects you different than another, you may have to spend some time like really exploring one macronutrient before you try to perfect anything. Is you got those two broad categories, which they're not specific protocols, it's information. And you're just trying to be aware of the relationship between the two, right? And I don't think that's an unusual feeling, where it's like, okay, having one serving of potato chips isn't going to make you feel full. It'll make you feel more hungry, and that's very normal. If you are able to kind of take that and appreciate that, all right, I'm only going to eat this amount of this food, which isn't great for me, but I can actually stop and eat just that amount because you're keeping track of your quantity, then you're likely okay having that food, right? So it's not, there's not a should or would, it's just understanding the relationships. Because if you don't understand the relationships a lot of times and you just assume, well, I'm not eating that much, the concentrations of food and how hungry or full you feel are not an accurate way to go about things. And that's what happens, especially the way our food source is. It's just like we just don't have like this accurate reading because of the processing, because of how concentrated some of the calories are going into our body. We rely on our own hunger to tell us like when we're full. Now, when you start making your food a little bit higher quality on a regular basis, you get more reliable signals for satiety. But you can kind of pick and choose. Do I want to bias a little bit more of the quantity and have that be like what I'm keeping my eye on? Or do I want to bias more of the quality, and then I don't have to maybe focus as much on the quantity because my natural satiety might help me? But it really, like, I think you always want to have your eye on both, because it can be a slippery slope to just like let one go completely.
I know.
The idea of like your tastes, the things that you really enjoy, and the things that become bland, you can train that similar to how you train your body, how you train your fitness, how you train in like your cold tolerance and things like that we've talked about, where the idea of needing any sugar in your oatmeal, right? Any sweet in your oatmeal, like that's something that you gradually want to think about. Okay, can I get away from even needing any low sugar anything? Just because there's a big difference between going low sugar versus no sugar, not just because of calories, but because of the feeling that like that's actually what you're desiring at the moment, as something sweet to make this go down, right? And that, I think, is another important thing to be able to gradually change, right? Like gradually improve upon, where you don't really even like sweet in your oatmeal because it means something different to you. So think about like coffee in that way. It's like going from needing sweet sugar in your coffee to going black coffee, right? Yeah. That process, and just becoming someone who like literally likes black coffee more than they like sweet coffee, because you never would think that it'd be possible. It's almost like, all right, I'm just trying to tolerate the taste of coffee so I can get the caffeine, and I have to put as much sweet in it just so I can tolerate it, to the point where the association to the smell and the darkness of the coffee, you actually like it better when it's black. Okay. Like water. Water's bland, right? Yeah. And there's nothing to water. It's just bland. Yeah. You don't need a sweet in there to drink water. Some people do. Yeah. Saying, okay, I need to put some type of pseudo flavor in my water just to get it down. But if you've gotten to the point where water is palatable, or just like, okay, it's just water and it's refreshing to me, then other things that normally you would put an additive in can become, and it's that becomes, okay, when I'm doing this is my quality food. And then if I want to kind of have some of that taste that I'm looking for, know the difference. Because that's, even if you're just putting a little bit of sweet or you're putting a little bit of extra flavor on there, it's likely going to make you want to eat that more. But it's gradual like anything else. But if we're talking about progressive adaptation, your body can progressively adapt to different tastes. You've done it already. It's just a matter of kind of taking it farther, just like getting your deadlift higher. You can't oversimplify the calories in, calories out process. So what we've talked about so far is just really just the calories in, right? Yeah. And there's two broad categories there, but just because there's only two categories doesn't mean it's simple, right? Yeah. There's all of this relationships and progressively being able to tolerate things that are a higher quality food. So that's complex, and we just have to appreciate how that's working. The calories out, I think, is even more complex. So we think about it as just exercise, and that is like a very small amount of the calories out. So if you want to do the same thing with the calories outside of things and categorize it, you would think like your basal metabolic rate would be number one. And that there's a lot of stuff that can't be controlled, but the stuff that can be controlled would be your actual physical attributes of saying like, okay, am I strong? Am I fast? Do I have endurance? So I think it needs to be versatile too. From an overall metabolism standpoint, you want to be pretty good at all of the physical attributes. Like, what am I the worst at? And get better at that. Yeah. It just means like, how can I gradually, progressively get better at the things I'm not great at? And that starts to, theoretically, that would start to build metabolism. Because if you're somebody who, for instance, is really very active, with endurance movement, they're moving a lot throughout the course of the day, but they're very weak. They likely don't have a lot of muscle on their body. And we know that muscle has to do with metabolism. If you're somebody who has a good amount of muscle, but you also have a lot of fat on top of that, do the thing that you're not so good at, which would be doing things for longer and staying relaxed and doing that process, which might be building endurance. Or if you're always doing slow lifts, maybe you have to learn how to do faster lifts and do that for a little bit longer and connect that. So there's no definition of fitness. There is the specific categories within fitness that you can kind of say, okay, I'm good at this, but I need a little work at this, and then being able to target that and knowing how to target that too. And then when you get into so metabolism then becomes versatility, right? Like get more versatile in your physical capabilities. And then we can kind of look at it from the other categories would be, like your hormones. Or minimizing sugar, then you're probably going to keep your insulin low. That tends to be something that's helpful for weight loss. And you can see that just by giving people insulin, right? People that have no problem with weight, you give them insulin, they're going to gain weight. The same thing would be for cortisol. So cortisol then would be, like if you give someone prednisone, they're going to gain weight if they're on it for long enough. And usually it doesn't have to be that long. If it's like a straight up dose of prednisone, that's similar. That's very same thing as cortisol pretty much. You're going to basically see people gain weight. That's where the quality of food might be helpful. If you want to keep insulin low in your body, then maybe you want to eat less carbohydrates. Yeah. So there's a specific relationship to insulin. So it's something that you have to keep in mind. And then the cortisol piece would be stress and sleep and all those things. And if we have that understanding of this categorization, then we don't think of like sleep and stress as this sort of nebulous, like indirect thing that doesn't have to do with our weight loss. We realize it's like directly related because it's directly part of that calories out measurement. I mean, sure, it could be more specific, but those would be just two of the main things right there, where it's just like, okay, these are things we can possibly control, and it's important. And oftentimes it doesn't get looked as important. Only the exercise piece does. And usually the purposeful exercise we do, we're not burning a real legitimate amount of calories that would matter in our calories out equation. And I think once you take the idea of the calories out equation into context, then you realize like that's not that important. I mean, it's the things that you're doing when you're burning those calories, if they're aerobic oriented or cardiovascularly oriented, that's a valuable thing to get better with, but it's not because you're burning calories in that moment. Because that's just going to be negligible in the long run. The actual purposeful exercise, which we think about, like how many calories am I burning? How much energy is coming out during that actual exercise? Like what we're doing right now. It's just important to know that. It doesn't mean it's not useful. It's useful in many other ways. But I think the biggest use of it from a calories out perspective would be, are you using that purposeful exercise to get better at attributes, not to just move randomly? Is like the things that are burning the least amount of calories when you're actually doing metabolism in the long run the most.
You're right.
Your non-exercise activity, which is another category that's studied, and it's basically how much movement do you get throughout the course of the day that's not purposeful exercise. So it's more important to be keeping track of your total calories burnt in a day. That's just something like that could equate to just getting more steps, or like what we're doing with the Whoop app is how many calories are you getting per day, and can we gradually build that up? But that doesn't have to do with purposeful exercise. It can incorporate it, but it should be way more than you would ever be able to get in a session. Basically, your categories for calories out are metabolism, hormones, purposeful exercise, non-exercise activity, and then the thermic effect of food, which is actually often underestimated. The thermic effect of food, which means that every time you eat, you burn calories, actually. But certain food creates more of a caloric expenditure than others. And this is where I think protein comes into play and why protein is so highly promoted for weight loss. It's not a huge amount. You certainly wouldn't want to base your weight loss efforts just on that, but like it does fit. So here's where it gets a little confusing, in my opinion, or you don't want to say confusing, but it's like you can't do everything all at once. Where carbohydrates are the thing that create the highest insulin spike. But protein is higher than fat. So protein will still create a decent insulin spike. I want my thermic effect of food to be highest. I want my protein to be the highest thing I eat. So right there might be a little bit of a contradiction. Think of everything in extremes, then there's a contradiction. But if we just try to create an awareness of these relationships, then we just balance the idea out, right? And sometimes you might bias one to see how it affects your body, and then sometimes you might bias another. So if you're talking about fiber has been definitely demonstrated to be something that is helpful for weight loss. It improves satiety, all those things. Well, you're going to find most of that in carbohydrates. So you just have to balance it. So certainly processed foods compared to non-processed foods, I think that's a consensus idea that it's better to have non-processed foods than processed. Lovely tasting processed foods that we enjoy? No, it just means that we have to put it in this big equation that's pretty complex. Categorize it as such, it becomes less complex.